Good afternoon. I'm Deborah Price, founder and CEO of the Money Coaching Institute, and I have the wonderful Suzanne Alexander with me today from Mindful Finances. Suzanne is also a certified money coach and has been up to some very interesting things. So today we're going to have a conversation with her and find out a little bit more about her journey. So Suzanne, thank you so much for joining me. And I just want to first of all thank you for your time and also the really great work that you're doing. And I want to congratulate you on this new award that you recently won and wondered if you might share a little bit about that with
Yeah,
us.
absolutely. It's wonderful to be here. So, a little bit about my journey. So, I was in finance for about 18 years before I stepped into doing money coaching. And it was interesting throughout that period of time, not only observing my own relationship with money and identifying that, how we think and feel and what we do with money is usually in opposition. And the reality was, it was just during COVID that it really gave me a little bit more of time to reflect on this. And I delved into doing some personal development through a life coaching program. I thought, oh wow, this is interesting. This is part of that gap that I was witnessing with clients and also with my own relationship with money. And then I came across a financial workshop, and I delved more into doing some money coaching, and then eventually came to doing your program, which even took that deeper into really the psychology, but really coming from a therapeutic lens as well, a trauma-informed lens, which is definitely something that I've brought into where I am at today. And I've recently been nominated for an award, which is fantastic. Really just a reflection of the work that we do in terms of helping people around financial literacy and also supporting them to not only build, rebuild their relationship with money, but to a part of that is really healing that relationship with money, which so often we may not realize that we have this disconnect with our relationship with money. We can sometimes just see it as, this thing that just sits to the side. But the reality is, it really is a mirror of the relationship we have with ourselves.
Absolutely. It's
Mm.
interesting to me because, as you know, I've been doing the work for myself for over 30 years and 25 with the Money Coaching Institute. And for the longest time, when I used the term relationship with money, your relationship with money, and asked people to describe what that was like for them, they would just go, "What do you mean, my relationship with money? I don't have a relationship with money." And I go, "Well, then that's is your relationship with money. You and money are separated and therefore perhaps divorced eventually if you're not careful." So,
Yeah.
I would just joke with them because of course we have a relationship with money, but it wasn't even a concept back then. The idea
No.
of that
Yeah.
didn't even exist.
And that's
So,
the beauty with the work that you do, because the reality is the relationship is a reflection of the relationship that you have with yourself. So if you don't have this interaction, the connection, the awareness around money, it's sometimes a mirror back to say, well, what is the relationship you have with yourself? Are you aware of, what your thoughts, your beliefs, feelings, and emotions are? And the environment that you're in. So how are you talking about money? How is others around you talking about money, which really influences that relationship? Mhm.
right. So after working strictly on the practical financial side and then moving into the behavioral side, what would you say the biggest difference in terms of both value as well as experience that you've had that you might share with us?
Yeah, look, I think for me, when I worked with clients as a financial advisor, it's very left brain, logical, practical, as you would know from your experience. And the reality is, so often clients would present, and whilst we create a financial plan as a financial advisor, which is really an action guide on what steps need to be taken to get you closer to your goal and achieve your goal, what would happen is clients would come in and they're like, oh, yeah, we've gone off and done this. And unfortunately, it was either, resulting in them sabotaging the plan or their ability to achieve their goal, or they done it in a way that had been set up in the wrong structures and so forth. And so for me to now be able to delve into more of the psychology of why they do what they do and be able to support them to really start to understand where is the belief coming from? What are the thoughts that they have around money and what's instigated that? And we're both aware that it doesn't always necessarily have to do with money. It could have been an event or experience, more often than not happens in childhood, that's resulted in this overlay, this meaning that we've given to money. And that drives that behavior. And the other side of that, I see that is that top down. That's that,
Yeah.
the critical, the cognitive, some people would refer to it as the ego. And then the bottom up, which is, well, how do we feel? Like, what are the emotions we're experiencing about that? And that's definitely not something that I really went into as a financial advisor. I think, when I speak to financial advisors now, they see it as a bit of a can of worms. If we open that, can we hold the space? Do we have the capacity? And have we done the work on our own relationship with money and with ourselves to be able to really support the individual or couple in front of us? And so to be able to holistically bring that together and then looking at the environment. What are the environmental factors? What's the stresses around you? What's the narrative that keeps being reinforced back to you?
Mhm.
That then has provided much more of a holistic approach, which then supports the practical tools that I can then bring into the coaching sessions as well. Mm.
That's great. So, do you have a story, whether it be personal or of a client? Obviously, we don't name names, but anecdotally, that sort of demonstrates that in a way that might make it easier for others to understand.
Yeah, I can broadly speak about a number of my clients when we talk about, and I just want to touch on because one of the things that you really have, I think, is such a fantastic um, component of what we do is starting to look through the lens of archetypes, these
Mhm.
money types that you created. And one of the things that I've identified is that a lot of the clients that I particularly work with really identify with the innocent archetype or the fool archetype. And when we say that, the innocent is someone who is really, we just don't have the financial awareness or financial literacy. And definitely in Australia, we have limited financial literacy being taught in the home environments and then school environments. And the fool archetype is really just someone who's really overly generous and literally, as you describe it, will give their, the shirt off their own back, but then think, well, what am I going to wear? And the reality is a lot of the clients that I work with will come with that archetype. And part of that is watching particularly someone who might be coming from a lens of limited financial literacy and really quite afraid and fearful around money to the point that they may not even open, envelopes or emails from banks with regard to their transactions, or they have no idea. All they know is they get money in their bank from their employer
Right.
and then it just disappears. They don't know sometimes if they've got savings or if they're spending more than what they earn. And it's so powerful to watch once we start focusing on the core part. So the first start, we always start with mindset and our mind body connection. And when we delve into the mindset, for them to really understand, well, where did that belief, where did that connection, those thoughts come from? Where's the emotion that's driving a lot of the behaviors? Once they unpack that it's almost like an automatic switch that they then move into starting to feel more aware, which is always key, awareness, and then moving into, as we build on that awareness, the confidence. And I've watched a number of clients go from complete fear around money to now they're actually pretty much taking over charge of, managing the household finances and really engaging, particularly if they're in a couple. If they're an individual, it's like, oh my gosh, I've now built this skill because I'm now aware. And instead of trying to learn that over, 10, 20 years, I studied for, and I'm still studying more than 10 years. The reality is it's short tracking that. And what
Yeah.
we know is foundational, and we wish that this had been taught in environments, like the school environment and home environments, becomes an environment for someone to step into, have these open and often raw conversations to be able to explore, well, what is driving this? And that's the beauty. So the confidence leads to, more often than not, building wealth, like being able to build savings, to start exploring, well, how else can I build wealth in my life? Not just financially, but also through the lens of the relationships I hold and also their own health, because we know how important our health is to our wealth.
Mhm.
Mm,
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been sort of every week when I'm preparing to do podcasts, I think about sort of what's been going on in my practice and sort of themes that are really current
mm,
and wanting to usually bring that to the conversation. And the thing that I've noticed a lot of lately, and I've actually had a couple of coaches reach out to me about this in the last couple of weeks, is how do you deal with resistance?
mm.
Because many people are resistant to actually doing the right thing or making the changes that they need to do in order to have the changes become realized, because we can't just think good thoughts and
Mm.
all of that. So my belief is that I don't call money coaching mindset work, because I think that's just an inch about what we do.
Yeah.
Certainly mindset is part of it, but you can't just have nice, pretty thoughts and expect anything to change. You really do need to do things differently. And that's a process. It's not going to happen overnight, nor would we ever expect that, because, research definitively shows that it takes, an average of 60 to 70 days to change any pattern or behavior. But I'm noticing that resistance is really up for
Mm.
people. And I'm curious, when you encounter resistance, what do you uh, what do you think about that resistance, and how do you manage it with your clients?
Yeah, so when resistance comes up, we'll have a conversation about growth and fixed mindset. And
Mhm.
a lot of the time, when resistance comes up, they may also not have made the decision that they're really ready to change this. And so, resistance can be, I should be here, I should be doing this because society tells me I should know how to manage money, or someone has, suggested that they reach out and get coaching or support. And so, it's really starting to identify what is actually the benefit of them staying in this position. Because if they're resisting, they're actually getting something from that. And whether
Right.
that's support or whether that's their ability just not having to deal with that, there'll be some need that they'll be getting. And so we
Mhm.
really start to explore, well, what does that start to look like if you were really able to step into this future version, I call it, of yourself, where you're self, responsible for your finances, that you can confidently make financial decisions. And so we start to bring in different aspects. So it could be visualization. Yes, it could be affirmations. And a lot of what I'm bringing more and more into the work I do is somatic therapy work, in terms of how do we embody this new version of who we want to be, because more often than not, the resistance is being driven by our nervous system holding on to past events and experiences that have resulted us more often than not living in this state of fight, flight, or potentially freeze. And without understanding where we're sitting from a nervous system perspective, it's very difficult to move forwards if you're currently sitting in one of those fight, fight, freeze, or fawn. And without knowing where you're at, without knowing the somatic tools, it is difficult for that person to step out of the resistance. But core to that is understanding what's the need that it's meeting by staying in that resistance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't do somatic therapy, and I think you don't have to have somatic
Mm.
peace to help people move through resistance, but I know that sometimes resistance is lodged in a physiological capacity. And so, one of the tricks that you might use is that I have people actually begin to embody what does it mean to physically hold that warrior, because the warrior is the archetype of action, right? And so it's got a physicality to it. And I remember once I had a client who his wife was just such a warrior magician. I mean, this is a woman who really, really succeeded and achieved at a very high level. And she was by far she wasn't the primary breadwinner because he made a very good living himself, but she was certainly doing much better in terms of her income than he was. And his comparison of the two, made him feel at times just not as capable, right?
Mm,
Not as good as either. And so when we did the process, you know, he scored quite low on Warrior. And I said, I'm not really buying this. I
mm,
don't really believe that you don't have any Warrior. And I think there's something else going on. And he said, well, those are the scores. What's wrong? And I said, you know how I know that it's not accurate? I said, you're a triathlete.
mm,
You have a Warrior. You can't be a triathlete and run race after race after race without a warrior inside of you. So that same physical capacity that you have that has caused you over and over again to be able to, you know, do those races and really achieve, he would always come in, in the top 5 or whatever, tells me you have a warrior. You just are convinced that it only shows up in that capacity, but it doesn't because it's inside of you. And that's the thing, is that's an embodied portion. And he
mm,
sat back and he just went, oh my God, you're right. And I said, the challenge is that you've been comparing yourself to your wife. And so
mm,
you diminish yourself by comparison, which is something we see people do. And that in and of itself can create resistance for people because they'll just say, oh no, I'm just never going to be like that, or I'm never as good as. And, comparison is obviously a challenge for many people in the world. So I think that getting that the warrior itself is a physiologically driven, embodied archetype. And if you have
mm.
it in one place, you can cultivate it in another, is really helpful to help, in terms, and that is a somatic aspect. So,
Yeah. And I think that the value with regard to that, it's also just that awareness, because so often we can compartmentalize parts of our life. And sometimes it just takes someone externally to be able to go, hang on, let's look at this. And to be able to allow them to really sit in that and hold that space while they acknowledge, actually, I've got this inside of me.
yeah,
Why can't I apply that to the finance, or why have I chosen not to?
that's right.
Yeah, beautiful share. Mm.
And so, in terms of your journey, are you still actively in the financial services industry? Do you still do financial planning and manage money, or are you mostly all money coaching now?
So all money coaching. So I stepped away from financial advising when I started Mindful Finances 4 years ago.
Wow.
And so really loving more delving into the psychology, the behavioral aspect. As I mentioned before, looking at sort of the nervous system and emotional processing. For me, that's really lights me up. And this, it comes back to, and I know you're passionate about this. This is what, I really felt when I did your program, was really understanding why we do what we do.
Yeah,
Because it's so often when I'll speak to financial professionals, and when I talk to them about, well, what do you do when resistance comes up? And they just say, no, no, I just tell them that they have to do a budget. And I'm like, oh, okay. But if someone's sitting in a place of resistance or fear or overwhelm, that's not going to work. They're
yeah,
just going to shut down even more. And that comes back to the nervous system response. And I think the beauty in the work that we do as coaches is we help to navigate. And, we always sort of talk about, particularly in Australia, that financial counselors are really coming from a perspective of when you're really in financial distress. And then you've got the financial advisors that can provide more specific, more detailed product investment advice. And we sit in this, the middle where we can really
Mhm.
delve into the psychology, we can delve into helping you understand why you do what you do, which is really transformational for them to take the action steps and then
Mhm.
either work collaboratively with a financial advisor, or maybe they'll engage an investment specialist down the track. That's, this where I see that money coaching is really foundational, building out these tools and skills at a holistic perspective,
Right.
both mind and body. And that's the beauty in doing the work that, we're doing, and what I'm doing as well.
Yeah.
Mm.
I just want to make a note here for the listeners. When we talk about psychology and or therapeutic modalities, we are not speaking as a therapist would, because we are not therapists
Yeah.
and we do not diagnose or treat people. That is not the work of a money coach. We work in what would be more considered coaching psychology and behavioral work as it applies to money patterns, behaviors, and emotions, and it is a non-clinical area, therefore it is a coaching modality, true in truth. So the biggest difference between a coach and a therapist is, do you handle and work with clinical disorders? We do not. However, I do train therapists and I do have therapists who do both, but for the most part, money coaches are people who are not trained or licensed in, the to treat or diagnose or treat rather, people in any capacity.
Yeah.
So it's
And
always important for me to let people know that, because we use language that can be confusing, sometimes to people.
Yeah, and really good point, Deborah, because a lot of the clients that I work with will either be working with a trained professional, a psychologist, psychotherapist, counselor, or I might identify with working with a client that they need to reach out for that additional support.
Exactly.
Yeah, so beautiful awareness on that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we'd like this to change, but there really aren't that many therapists who have a background in money dynamics, because it was virtually absent from the curriculum for most of, you know, since the field of psychology was invented. And I think, as I've shared with you guys in class, Freud probably was the one who created that challenge by saying that money was the equivalent of human excrement. So nobody wanted to go there. Shame
And I
on
think
Freud.
Exactly. But I think that also drives, and I'm not sure if it's in the States as well, but in Australia, we've really struggled to bring this into the education curriculum. And we know it's key foundational, because if we're not getting that at home, or if we are getting it at home and you've got parents with different money stories and generationally that's being passed down, to be able to bring in some key foundational tools into the school environment that really sets people up. And the more I speak to, those that are in their 20s or teenagers, they're like, yeah, but I wish, and even adults, I wish we knew this stuff, because we would just be so further ahead instead of living in a bubble almost until they get to a certain age, and then they step into this fear of going, oh, I guess I should grow up. I guess,
Yeah.
this
But
money
how
thing,
do I do that?
yeah,
How do
I
I do
don't,
that
and I still
without
don't
any
know.
guides or anybody to help me understand how I got to where I am and how to get to where I'm going?
Yeah. And look,
And a financial
it's
plan isn't going to do that, unfortunately.
no, and look, from a financial advisor perspective, they don't have a capacity to be able to, because doing the planning work itself takes so much time and involvement, whereas the coaching takes as much time, if not more, when you're actually really starting to unpack and helping them to reprogram their own money story and build out that healthy relationship with money. And that's I think the key distinguishment, because we are surrounded with so much information around how to manage money and how to build wealth.
Mhm.
And, there's, great podcasts like yourself, but there's also books and other resources out there. But it's actually also overwhelming, because once someone starts to read this information, they know logically and practically how to apply it. They just don't, they physically just cannot take that first step.
Yeah.
So it's the emotions, the thoughts that are potentially holding them back. And that's where coaching becomes a key tool to sort of help them to actually take the action and move forwards.
Yeah. Yeah, I love in some uh, other kinds of modalities, especially in the financial planning world, I remember it's like pulling teeth. You're always pulling, trying to pull things out of people and get them to cooperate and comply to
Mm.
give you what you need to do the budget, to conform to the financial plan that they've spent time and money creating. So you're constantly pulling at people to get you to do whatever it is they need.
Yeah.
Whereas in money coaching, we just hold people's hands and walk
Mm.
beside them wherever they are, meet them on that journey and just guide them through. So there's not a lot of pulling things from people. It's more of a process and a journey that I think is a lot easier in many respects. And I don't know about you, but I always found that once you did that, the client's far more willing to do the things they need to do practically. They
Mm.
just, they suddenly go, oh, now I need to do this part. And then
Yeah.
it's easy for them because they're not dealing with their own inner resistance. Have you experienced anything similar to that so far?
Without a doubt, with every single client, because when we think of a financial advisor, you literally present to a financial advisor and they're unpacking and they're getting your financial history together, and it's all done at once so that they've got, you might have one or two meetings to
Yeah.
unpack that, but then that information is then used to inform the financial statement of advice. With a coach and with the work that I'll speak from my perspective, we start with that mindset component and we're just stacking on things. So once they're able to unpack their money blueprint, then we're able to focus on the numbers. And then from focusing on the numbers, we're then able to sort of identify what it is that they're wanting to achieve. So we're really holding their hand, we're really advocating, we're their biggest supporters, and we're holding the space for them to explore this in a way that is nurturing for them to allow that time to be able to process a lot of the emotions that are coming up as they explore, and
Mhm.
the awareness that they gain. And I think that's something that, is one of the biggest things that we do as coaching. We're not telling them what to do in terms of, you do this, and you'll get to this, destination. The reality is we're guiding them to identify this themselves. So the decisions that they're making is being really empowering them, because whilst we're there to guide and ask the questions, the answers are coming out. And if they need some support, yes, we'll bring in some mentoring to be able to provide some perspective, but they're making the decision. And I think that's the foundation with regard to money coaching, is that you're building them up rather than just, grabbing the information, pulling it out, and then taking away, creating a statement of advice. You're actually helping them to identify how much of that information they may be aware of, and actually helping to nurture them so that they can start building that trust, that awareness. And that's the embodiment of the warrior that you mentioned before, which is the goal taker, the goal setter, the goal taker. They're the driven one. And that is so foundational for them to step in and embody, but it's done in a time frame that's suited to them. It's not
Mhm.
rushed. Whereas the way that financial advisors work is usually you've got 1 to 2 sessions to unpack that, and then that information is used. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's all data, facts, and information as opposed to who are you and what matters to you in terms of um, the deeper reasons that we do any of this, right? The meaning that we're looking to help people to discover so that the choices that they make moving forward are in alignment with a greater truth,
Mm.
and an understanding of who they really are and what they need and want to truly create. And that's not formulaic in any way,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah. And it's being able to hold space in a way that resonates with the client or clients in front of
Mm.
you too. I think that's the powerful thing with regard to coaching is really being able to identify. And when I work with clients that might be neurodiverse, it's holding space to understand, where is your capacity level right now? Like how much information can you take in, but also where are you at and how do you sometimes there might be a little longer delay in between sessions because they just need that little bit more time to integrate. So everyone's unique from that perspective. Whereas, going back to my experience as a financial advisor, you could be trying to get all that information in one meeting and it's quite overwhelming, on a reflection, trying to sort of download all this stuff and just going, yep, we need all this, we know need all this. This way it does allow them really time to process and really think through. And that's that deeper level of awareness, which so often we don't give ourselves time or space to really sit in.
Yeah.
Mm,
It's really interesting that you bring up neurodiversity because Karen Ely and I had a quite a conversation about that in my podcast with her because she's seen more and more issues. And I'm in training to become an ADHD certified practitioner because not only do I have ADHD, but I have a lot of clients with it. And the more I study and understand it, from, really just the neurodynamics of ADHD or a lot of it's not one size fits all, and it's not one size fits all with any individual. But if you listen to the primary aspects, I want you to just hear this because suddenly the light bulb went on for me. Unable to focus, and just add the word money.
mm,
Unable to focus on money, money avoidant, overwhelmed with money, um, anxious, fearful, um, procrastinate around money, um, easily triggered around money. You know, those are like 5 or 6 words that are core words to describe a person with ADHD. And I believe they're really common with many people, way
mm,
more than are diagnosed with ADHD in its truest form. But I'm starting to think the vast majority of human beings, maybe 60, 70%, have what I would call money ADHD. It's a true phenomena because people, when they have those subconsciously driven dynamics and they don't know they do, those are the subsequent behaviors that we see. And those
mm,
are the exact same descriptors for a person with ADHD. We just
yeah,
need to add the word money to it, and it's the same thing. And it creates the same sort of pain, suffering, and shame and masking that we see with people with ADHD. So it's a
yeah.
really interesting, almost like a compartmentalized aspect of neurodiversity that is strictly about money, but it expands into a far greater population of people. And I'm just curious what you think of that.
Without a doubt, like everything you're saying, I'm resonating with because, you know, I think one of the big things with regard to this, and I resonate with, so much what you've said, particularly when I started in my 20s. I displayed probably all of those, and it has taken time, and that's why delving more into this lens has really been supportive, not only with my own relationship with money, but also with clients' relationship with money. But the reality is, you're right. Most of the clients that I work with are coming in with that lens. So
Yeah.
it's the overwhelm, it's the procrastination, it's putting their head in the sand. And a lot of that, I do believe, will come from those environmental factors. So it could
Yeah.
be societal expectation, it could be generational, it could be cultural, it could be religious. And, even with some of the cultural awareness, and I was chatting, I was on a training session with regard to this the cultural aspect of how we handle money. For some cultures it hasn't really evolved, and so
At
we do,
all. Yeah.
yeah, at all, exactly. And so a lot of that overwhelm is really really embraced and procrastination, because it's almost like it's the tribe's or the community's responsibility instead of your own. And one of the
Mhm.
things that I speak about with clients is, really stepping into that radical responsibility, that self-responsibility. And that can be a process to really step into that. It's knowing that you have the skills and tools to be able to step into that with the right support and guidance. It's right versus I can't do this. It's I can't do this yet. So
Mhm.
it's really stepping into that power of that yet and really starting to go, well, what action can I take to move forwards?
Right.
And whether it's engaging a coach, whether it's reading a finance book or listening to a podcast or attending a webinar or session, information session, just that one action can start to open the lens of how we see the world and expand our level of awareness. But definitely everything you mentioned from an ADHD or neurodiverse perspective resonates with what I've seen and what I've own, experienced myself.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about your life now and what you're up to, what would you say your greatest vision and hope is for people that you work with and, the world at large? What are you visioning and hoping for yourself to bring?
Yeah, look, what drives me in is really for everyone to be living their abundant version of their life. And what I mean by that is it's not about how much money you have. And I love this Oprah Winfrey quote, which is, I don't live my life by accident, I live my life by intention. And when we put that through a lens of money, how intentional are we with regard to how we spend our money? Because I've worked with clients that have literally, you know, earned very little money, and yet they have built wealth from a financial, a relationship, a health perspective, more so than maybe some of the individuals I've worked with that have earned millions of dollars, of in very financially secure positions, but are unhappy, are really just spending for the sake of keeping up with their neighbors and work colleagues. And the reality is, when we can come back into being more conscious, more intentional with regard to how we spend our money, we do step into more abundance. We find that when we're spending in line with our values, we're living the life that we didn't realize we could live. And ultimately, we can start living that right now. And then we're aligning our finances. So every time we spend with intention, it's aligning with our purpose, our vision, our values. And it actually creates, you really sit from a place of gratitude. And I
Yeah.
think if the more that we can step into recognizing it's not about, I have to be sailing around the world on a yacht, or I have to be traveling to these exclusive places and staying in five-star resorts. Yes, that might be wealth to someone, but it may not be wealth to you. And not without understanding your values, you're not going to understand that. Someone's value might be travel and venture, but your value might be connection and family. So it's getting really clear with that and then bringing the lens of money in, and how does that support? How does that allow you to enhance the experiences that you have? If your value is contribution, the more that you earn, the more that you're able to contribute back. But it's also looking
Right.
through the lens of non-financial metrics. What time, what wisdom, what knowledge can you impart? And even you're doing this podcast now, you're imparting your wisdom and your knowledge, your time to be able to uplift the world in terms of how they can, rebuild and really
Yeah.
establish a healthy relationship with money.
Yeah, I'm always amazed, the exercise grand scale imagining,
Mm.
which is one of our exercises that you do in training and we give to our clients. Um, do you know what so if you won the lottery, right? And how much would your lottery ticket be? And what would you do with it? But the question that really gets me every time is how much would you give yourself to live on monthly,
Mm.
right? So we have people who say they want to have 30 billion. And then we have people who say they need 10 million or 25 million. and all places in between. But do you know what the number one number is that people say they would give themselves monthly to live on?
I'm intrigued. I would say,
10,000 a month.
yeah, I was going to say 10,000 a month.
10,000 a month is the magic number.
Yeah,
And it doesn't matter whether they've said it was 30 billion or 10 million
yeah,
or 5 million.
yeah,
And so that's a really fascinating little piece of research
yeah. Because
because it does show that, first of all, that's only $120,000 a year. So what do you think about that? I'm just curious.
yeah, look, I resonate with the 10,000. I think that's, from my perspective, when I speak to individuals, they're like, if I can bring that in, that would just give me that sense of freedom. And I know there's been research and statistics, put out there that, most people will feel a level of comfort around 70,000. Now, that is obviously dependent on the environment that you grew up in, what sort of wealth that you were surrounded by as well. But one of the things that it comes back to for me is meeting that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So when
Yeah.
we can beat that basic level of needs, that food, shelter, water, then we are really putting ourselves in a place of safety. And then what is it above that? So it might be, additional money to enhance events or have, enhanced events and experiences in line with your values. So it could be, oh, great, I get to travel overseas a couple of times a year. And that, gap between, say, the 70 to the 120 is allowing them that freedom. And so
Yeah.
the reality is, one of the big things as I reflect on this is that a lot of the time it's not about how much, it's just knowing that you've got a bit of a, fallback, that you've got a little bit of cash flow to allow you to do those things that are more sitting in the wants versus the needs side. And I think that's the beauty in that. So yeah, it's a great benchmark that you've identified.
Well, and it makes me think that if we just looked at how much money governments collectively spend on social welfare systems, on whatever kinds of programs that there are out there to try to, superannuation, social security systems, you name it, right? Not to mention the billions of dollars that are spent on, you know, helping people recover from bankruptcy and or other kinds of credit debt issues. Financial literacy programs worldwide consume a lot of money and they're totally ineffective long term. I mean, the research is solid there. It's unsustainable after 9 months for most people because of the behaviors, and yet they don't talk or work on the behaviors, right? So if you look at the collective money that it takes on an annual basis to try to keep people like from falling in through the cracks, blah, blah, blah. My theory is if you just gave everybody $10,000 a month
Mm.
for life and you let them work and you accumulate the money and you then take that money and you invest that money for the collective good, we would be further ahead as a society by a long shot. And I don't think it would cost that much more. I really don't.
Yeah, and look, as you say
And
that,
or you let people who earn under that 10,000, you give them a subsidy to get them up to the 10,000 because you don't have to give everybody that because they have jobs. And I do think people are better off working. But I don't think we're looking at money from a socioeconomic and or political lens from a very creative or even helpful way. And
yeah, and this comes back into a lot of the work that, we identify through doing the certified money coaching program as well, is that when you start to delve into this work, you understand your blueprint and you really start to explore what the vision, your purpose, values are. One of the thing I think that is key is that, and there is research around this, which is lower socioeconomic people, to an extent, not everyone, will find that they will be more focused towards external things, experiences to be able to lift their level of happiness. And so what happens is, my concern is without addressing the mind body connection is that if you were to give them $10,000, would they want more? Because right now they're identifying with external giving them happiness. And yet when we can help them to be happy in themselves, and Jim Carrey, alluded to the fact, I wish everyone experienced poverty and riches, because you would realize that you don't change
That's
whether
right.
you're entirely, poor or entirely rich. The reality is you still become the same person. It's just exacerbating that. And I think, it's a great metric to be able to work and navigate and explore. But I think there's also that component of, even if we give them more money, is
Mhm.
that really going to bring true happiness? And that starts
I
within.
don't see it as ever being a happiness factor because I don't really think that money, one way or another, more money never makes anybody happier,
Yeah.
except for the dopamine-driven immediate impact.
Mm,
But it's unsustainable, just like dopamine is. You just get a little bit of it hit here and there, and it's an unsustainable thing.
mm,
So it's not really to me ever about the happiness it brings, but there is a feeling that it could bring them the security. And
mm.
for some
Yep.
people, when they feel insecure, they just can't be happy because they're so fearful all the time
Yep.
that they can't manage it. But we also know plenty of clients. I have clients with multi-million dollar portfolios who are terribly unhappy,
Mm,
but
yep.
the unhappiness, it has nothing to do with how much money they have.
Hmm.
Um, and except for sometimes the more money they have, the more fearful they become because now they're afraid of losing it.
Hmm.
So I think that, these are complex issues that aren't the same for everyone,
Mm,
clearly, but that it's very, very clear to me that money does not buy happiness for anyone.
hmm.
It can give us the illusion of happiness and even the illusion of safety because we live in a world where no matter how much money you have, you never know what can happen. And
Mm,
that doesn't mean you don't do it, but that markets rise and fall, circumstances happen. There are currency devaluations and interest rate and market fluctuations. There's so many variables that can happen that change the value of what you have overnight.
mm.
And so you just make a plan, you do the best you can, and you try to live your best life aligned with something else that matters. And don't let that be money because money is the dessert. You shouldn't make a meal of it. And
Yeah.
that's the biggest problem.
Yeah, and I think one of the two questions that, I would be posing is, what brings you security, and what sort of brings you success or happiness? Because once you start to really unpack what that means to you, more often than not, when we start to look at our fears, a lot of our fears are so driven by money, or it's got a money is included in a lot of those fears. But when we look at success and happiness, what brings us joy, it's usually not money orientated. And
You
so, yeah, that comes back into what you were just mentioning, just being clear that money doesn't buy you happiness, but what does happiness mean to you?
I think, the research on that has been pretty solid and they keep doing it again. And I haven't had a chance to digest the latest happiness research because they just redid another study and I'm curious whether it's changed since the one that said that 70,000 was the magic number. That was
Mm,
about 15 years ago, so that number's definitely changed. But the before I used to give keynotes on, what does really bring us happiness if it's not money. And truthfully, most people say freedom,
mm,
the sense of freedom and security,
hmm.
and to have more time with the people that we love.
Yep.
And the interesting thing about that is that neither one of those cost anything,
Yeah.
really.
Yep.
But what do you think about the perception when people say to me, well, I'm not free because I have to have a job and therefore I'm not free. What do you think about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, look, it was interesting. I was reading an article the other day, and it was talking about Abraham Hicks, with regard to her learnings, and
Hmm.
she says so often people come and they expect this big revelation, and she's, says, well, ultimately you're striving to live in a place of joy, like freedom, and they're like, yeah, but what else? And she goes, but if you had that, then isn't that what you're striving for? And so it really comes back to understanding if we don't know what freedom means to us, what we don't know what joy or happiness means to us, we're always going to be in that chasing mode. We're always going to feel like we never have enough. We're always going to compare ourselves to others because that's what we're comparing to. But if we get really clear and become intentional around, well, what does freedom mean to us? What does joy, what does happiness mean to us? And that's not saying that we're, going to be in this state of joy all the time. We have fluctuating emotions. It's normal to flow in and out of
Right.
these. But the reality is, if we can't clearly articulate what freedom means to us, we'll always be in a place of chasing. And that's when we step out of being in alignment with what our abundant life is, because we don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always I can't remember who wrote it, but it's a well-known song. The line is freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to that in
100%.
ways that we could explore, because I often find that the happiest people are the people who are not very attached.
Mm.
In other words, they don't sit around fretting and worrying all the time about what they might lose,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to their money. You know,
Yeah.
they'll make a plan, they'll park it, they'll let somebody help them rather than try to figure it out all themselves. And they don't really worry about loss all the time because
Mm.
that actually creates the conditions for priming the instinctive brain into becoming fearful, anxious, survival oriented, and or taps into a lot of old memories from the midbrain and the emotional brain around things that have happened in the past, and then projecting that, of course, now we have to protect and defend so it doesn't happen again. And
Hmm.
yet, all of our best efforts may or may not ever result in A, it may never happen, probably won't, and B, if it does, you still can't do anything about it. Usually, if it's all going down and it's a house of cards, guess what? We're all on the Titanic and we're going down together. That's sort of
Mm.
my philosophy,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. And so we do spend an enormous amount of time worried about loss in the
Yeah.
future,
Yep. And
which
that
is,
also can come from that place of being in comfort. I remember reading in my early 20s around how, when you've come from challenging environments or you've experienced early on, it can also be used as a bit of a motivator because you're coming from a place of, well, what's the worst that can happen with me? Like I've already experienced, the worst of, conditions or environments, whatever
yeah.
that is for you. And so what happens is you tend to take the action because it's like, well, what's it going to do? It probably will put me back in the same position I was in. Whereas when
Mhm.
you come from comfort, what happens is, well, I can lose that comfort. And so it's really starting to train our bodies to be comfortable with sitting in the discomfort. And that comes back to that growth mindset, which it's
Yeah.
okay. And I love Sarah Blakely, how she describes, growing up when she used to get home from school with her brother and her dad would go, what did you fail at today? Because the reality is, when we sit in discomfort, we're actually broadening our awareness. We're actually starting to take on risks, and we do need to be able to take on some risks to be able to create change and look at different perspectives and be open to opportunities. And it's also a way in which we can build wealth. And
Mhm.
so that's that invitation that when we are so closely stuck in this place of comfort, and I see that with a lot of clients I work with because they're not used to sitting in discomfort. So taking the discomfort of maybe looking at their bank statement or looking at their bank balance or holding on to money where they may have spent, every cent each pay is stepping into a place of growth. That discomfort is growth.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, I kind of think I personally came in that way. I was a breech baby with a cord around my neck. So,
Mm.
I thought that was an interesting metaphor.
Yeah, yeah,
Going, okay,
absolutely.
this is going to be a hell of a ride if I make it through the birth canal, right? But I do think that having come from a background of tremendous scarcity, you know,
Mm.
and challenge at all levels, did give me the the impetus to move forward and take really big risks because I
Mm,
didn't have anything to lose. I'd
mm,
already experienced the worst of everything. And
yeah.
that's something that I really want people to understand is that, name the challenges and hardships of your life as the blessings and thank
Mm,
them.
yeah.
Because without that, you wouldn't have known how to get up and rise from that to
Mm,
become who you were meant to be. And even though it's a giant R&D project, we're all just research and development, trying to figure out what in the heck works and what doesn't work for the most part, right? But if we part of the challenge, and you see this in the stories in that we work with our clients, is that most everything we read and hear is negative when it comes to money.
mm, yeah.
And that often gets named as the cause. This is why I am the way I am and why my life isn't the way that it could be. And there's truth to that.
Mm,
But you can't live in that space and
mm,
hold that as your life's mantra, because if
yeah.
you do, you're doomed. And that's really
Yeah.
so important for people to understand is, you know, name it all as a blessing, even the hardest of all,
Yeah.
because without it, who would you have become?
Yeah, and the beauty in this, and we talk about these learnings, which gets thrown around so often, and through all of the adversities that I've experienced, yeah, sure, maybe at the time I've just been frustrated and angry and upset, but the reality is every time I've reflected back and gone, okay, well, what can I learn? What do I need to look at this, or how do I need to look at this in a different way? There's always been growth. It literally has been an invitation to either go deeper or to look at things in a different perspective or light. And that's the power in that. So whenever I go to blame something else outside of me, I'm like, okay, well, what part have I played in this? And
Hmm.
also, how have I attracted that? And, I precursor that because there has been some traumatic events for people that, it was outside their control. And,
Yeah, most of
definitely
it is.
without a doubt. But it's also going, well, where has that led me to where I am today? And I'm either choosing to stay in that, um, more oppressed state and allowing really the perpetrator or whatever, the
Yeah.
circumstance was to take control, or how can I step out of that and use this as a motivator, as a tool, as an instigator to really move forwards and really excel in my life.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
absolutely.
that's coming from the fixed, which is more so that victim mentality, or, I've been impacted from, an event or experience or what I've witnessed or heard, to stepping into your power, which again comes back to embodying the warrior. And I always refer to for women the warrioress because it's helping them to visualize through and really embody who is that for them and how do they show up and how do they feel. And you're right, a lot of the time they're coming back into feeling that sense of calm, that freedom, that joy, that happiness, and knowing that we've got that all within us. It's
Hmm.
just doing a little bit of work to find it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to feel our feelings and grieve and experience whatever is underneath what's happened.
Mm,
And then we need to pack it up and let it go
mm,
and heal and forgive, or we just create new versions of it over and over again until
mm,
we finally realize that it's time to let it go
mm,
and then honor ourselves for whatever part of that journey that we're on. We can't bypass it, it's very unhealthy to bypass that completely, but boy, I feel like we're at a really interesting sort of fork in the road as the collective society. The
mm,
rise of the victim, which I've always said, usually the victim archetype rises whenever the tyrant archetype becomes more prevalent, because you
mm,
can't have a tyrant ruling without a victim who's
mm.
willing to be victimized, right?
Yeah.
And we see it now worldwide. It's pretty
Yeah.
frightening.
Yeah, and that's where the invitation is to do the deeper inner work. So if you are experiencing situations where you're constantly blaming others, I don't earn enough, or it's someone else's fault I didn't get this job, or it's someone else's fault that this investment didn't go the way that I wanted to, or it's someone else's fault that I'm not living the life that I was destined to live in, the invitation is to come back in and really start to explore, well, what role have I got in this? Have I actually
Mhm.
advocated or asked for a pay rise? Have I kept going to apply for jobs? Is it, that I've looked at other avenues to bring in sources of income?
Yeah.
Am I spending in a way that actually supports me? Because that's the invitation. It's the mirror to say, hey, where are you sitting? Is this really serving you long term? And, I look at that lens through, health, wealth, and relationships. And I always think when I'm in blaming of someone else, then it's having an impact on my nervous system, which is directly relating and impacting my health. So suddenly my health's out of kilter. And then more than likely, I'm whinging to someone else. More than often, it's my husband. And I'm like, well, then I'm not really creating a harmonious relationship with him or any other friends that I'm speaking with. And then how does that impact my wealth? Because if I'm in a place of being a victim, then I'm effectively rejecting wealth. I'm rejecting opportunities and experiences, which is what enhances and contributes to freedom. So it's really starting to look through this holistic lens of going, oh, okay, where can I start? What do I have control over? And really
Mhm.
stepping into that power of, okay, wherever I have control over, I can start moving forwards and taking action. And being okay that there are some aspects of our lives, of the world and what's happening at the moment that is outside of our control.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Hmm.
Well, this has just been such a rich and powerful conversation. I am really, really happy to have been able to spend this time with you. Suzanne, is there anything that you would like to say? First of all, please do give your website and let people know how to contact you, but also, is there anything that you would like to impart, any little wisdom to our audience that you think might be useful?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for having me on today. I mean, one of the benefits of doing the certified money coaching program was doing a deep exploration of my own relationship with money and also being guided through not only by yourself, but other, another student from the program, which in itself is powerful because there's only so much we can do by ourselves. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
plays the integral role, which is the more that we can go more deeper into ourselves, not only do we enhance the relationship we have with ourselves, but we also enhance that relationship with money. If
Mm-hmm.
anyone wants to connect, I am at mindfulfinances.com.au, on Instagram at mindful_finances, and also on LinkedIn under Suzanne Alexander. But it's been an absolute pleasure to share this time with you today. And yeah, as you mentioned, have this beautiful conversation.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. I want to keep in touch. Please let us know how you're doing, and we will hopefully speak again soon. I'm hoping to come to Australia next year and do some more training live, so maybe I'll get to see you then.
That would be wonderful. Look forward to it.
All right. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Everybody, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on Conversations About Money.